Hey guys, this is Dr. Malloretti. I just wanted to go into more detail about what the DKA protocol is. Mainly, I want to help you guys make sense of the labs and then how to take action after interpreting those labs. So first, I wanted to go through the general sequence of events in DKA. First of all, the doctor is the one who's going to recognize that the patient is in DKA and request the DKA protocol. And then there's going to be an initial evaluation of your BMP, your VBG, and your glucose. And using that data, we're going to interpret how much insulin to start and what kind of fluids to start with the appropriate kind of additives, such as potassium, glucose, sodium bicarbonate. And we're going to do all of that using our general guide page where we start with our interpretations. And then the next thing is this process is going to happen again and again, basically. Every 4 hours, we're going to check a BMP and a BBG, and we're going to interpret those results and then change the fluids and change the insulin accordingly. And again, we're going to have a Q1 hour finger stick that we're going to interpret using our general guide page and update our insulin and dosing, and also update our um, uh, fluids with the correct kind of additives every single time. So finally, at some point, the labs are going to show that the patient is not in DKA anymore, and we're going to transition the patient out of DKA with the particular kind of guidelines on the general guide page, switching them over to subcutaneous insulin or Lantus and sliding scale. And eventually, the patient is going to be fed, and the patient is going to be out of DKA at that point. So here, Here, I want to share with you the calculator that Dr. Rahul Malareddy has created for us. It's a reflection of the protocol which you're about to see online. Give me 1 second. I'm going to open it up for you guys and show you exactly what it looks like. So here's the DKA protocol, but in a calculator form online. The website is apachedka.com, something easy to remember. Another cool thing is it has the protocol in a PDF form in this corner here, and also the DKA presentation, the PowerPoint that we're going through, also there. And we're going to upload the video that we're seeing right now also onto there. So first, before we talk about a sample set of data, I wanted to show you guys how we get our data. So first, we have our CMP here that's listed in this particular order in our system, and we have our VBG listed in this particular order in our system. And from the CMP, we want our glucose. We want to know the sodium, the potassium, and the chloride, and also the bicarbonate, or it's listed as carbon dioxide. They both are the same thing. So don't get confused. And then we have the anion gap calculated there. We're going to use this particular number. We're not going to recalculate anything on our own. And then there's our pH that we use from the venous blood gas. And so that's the data in a little more table format here. So something important, we have to correct the sodium. We cannot use the sodium in our system. We have to correct it. And what that means is you have to go to mdcalc.com and look for the sodium correction for hyperglycemia calculator. And there's a website, mdcalc.com. And you can find that particular calculator on it pretty easily, or you can just Google MD-Calc sodium correction for hyperglycemia, and you'll find the calculator on Google itself. And you enter your sodium, you enter your glucose that the patient has, and you get your corrected sodium. And the reason we do this is patients with DKA or other situations where the glucose is way too high, the machine cannot interpret between glucose and the sodium, and ultimately you get artificially low sodiums, and so you have to correct for the excessive glucose that is interrupting the machine from calculating a correct sodium. And so you have to adjust for it with a formula, and you end up with this situation here. And so there's two calculators, apparently, two formulas. And so we're going to use the result on the right side, which I highlighted for you there. Here's our set one of data for this DKA patient. Just kind of listed out there is in a chart form for you guys. I'm going to go to the original protocol in the PDF form now and kind of go through with you exactly how we interpret this data using the general guide page. So here we have the DKA protocol's general guide page. And we always start on the left side and go all the way to the right from yellow to yellow. Here we have the MD requested DKA protocol to be started. So we're starting over here, and then evaluate the BMP, VBG, and latest glucose. And once you get to this box, you have three different options. You have a box at the top that says the anion gap greater than 20 or bicarb less than 16 or VBG pH less than 7.31, indicating that one of those being true means that the patient is in DKA, and that gives you certain instructions to follow. And then the second option here is the anion gap less than 20 and bicarb greater than 16 and VBG pH greater than 7.31. This is indicating the patient is not in DKA, but only in one BMP, meaning they can still go backwards into DKA if we don't treat them for a little bit longer. So there are certain instructions to follow for that. Then the third one is again the anion gap less than 20 and bicarb greater than 16 and VBG pH greater than 7.31 in two BMPs, indicating that the patient is not in DKA, and but in two BMPs, indicating that we're confident that the patient is coming out of DKA now. And so there's instructions to follow on how to transition the patient out of DKA into subcutaneous insulin and Lantus. So coming back to our data points say that the anion gap is greater than 37, or is 37, so that's greater than 20. So that puts us in this category automatically without having to go through any other pieces of data. But just to show you, bicarb is 5 for us, it's less than 16. And the VBGPH 7.23, it's less than 7.31. So we automatically fit into this category up here. Then we go to evaluating the chloride. The chloride is 99 for us, so that puts us in this category up here, greater than 80. Then again, our sodium is 143 and our chloride is 99. That fits us in this category down here, indicating that we need to go to normal saline protocol. That's the type of fluids we need to start. And then we also need to start the insulin drip itself because that has not been done yet. So I'm going to show you the same thing in our PowerPoint here. We have a glucose of 294 and the sodium and everything listed on the side there. So we started the MD protocol, a requested protocol, then the BMP, VBG, and latest glucose are going to be evaluated. And our particular patient is in DKA with a gap being greater than 20, or the bicarb being less than 16, or the bicarb or the VBG pH being less than 7.31. All three of those true for our patient. And then the chloride is greater than 80, sodium is less than 145, and our chloride is less than 109. And then we hit the normal saline protocol and the insulin initiation protocol. So more instructions to follow after that. So the insulin initiation, we have our data again here. So the patient is not on insulin drip yet, and the patient is still in DKA as we just determined. And then our potassium is 3.5 to 5 because it's 4.9. And our glucose is greater than 250 because it's 294. And that gives us instructions to start insulin at 0.15 units per kg bolus and 0.1 units per kg per hour after that. And instructions to draw glucose again, finger stick every 1 hour, and BMP VBG 4 hours after that. And so that's our recommendation. The patient is 90 kgs, and so that's 13 units bolus and 9 units per hour. I rounded down a little bit there. And so we've so far we've gone through the general guide page, and it's guided us to inform us that the patient is in DKA and that we have to start normal saline protocol, and then we have to start the insulin drip. We've started the insulin drip. Now we're going to come to the fluids and figure out exactly what kind of fluids we need to hang. So we're here in the normal saline protocol, and again, we start on the left side where the yellow box is and go all the way to the right side where the yellow boxes are to get an answer. And so starting here in the normal saline protocol section, we have the yellow box, the normal saline. Then first question we have to answer is, what is our glucose? Our glucose is 294, which puts us in this category is that it's greater than 250. And so then we go down following this arrow, and we end up in this additive, which is no glucose this time. And then next question we're going to answer is potassium. Is a potassium less than 3.5, between 3.5 and 5, or greater than 5? Ours is 4.9, so if it's in the middle category, so that means we end up with potassium 20 milliequivalents added to our fluids. And then the VBG pH, is it greater than 7 or less than 7? Well, ours is 7.23, so it's greater than 7. So that means, again, no sodium bicarb. And then after that, that leads us to a total accumulation of all the fluids and additives put together, saying normal saline potassium 20 milliequivalents at 200 cc an hour. So that's our answer for the fluids for this particular round of evaluation. So again, just going through the slideshow, here's our data, and here's the normal saline protocol, starting with normal saline box. Then we say that our glucose is greater than 290, greater than 250 because it's 294. So no glucose added. Potassium is 3.5 to 5 because ours is 4.9. So we add potassium 20, and then the VBG pH is 7.23, which is greater than 7. So we add sodium bicarb, and then our final answer is normal saline 20 milliequivalents at 200 cc an hour. So again, latest insulin recs are 13 units bolus because the patient is 90 kgs. It's roughly about 13.5, and then the continuing at 9 units an hour after that. And then latest fluid recommendations is normal saline potassium 20 at 200 cc an hour. So here's our latest summary of that same information. And now we're going to go to the calculator and enter the same information just to show you what it looks like. So here we have the DKA calculator. And so we're going to go through the first set of data. Every time we use the calculator, we have to answer a couple of important questions to kind of guide it to see where we are in the protocol. We have not started the insulin drip, and the patient has not been started on sub-Q insulin yet, and the patient's not tolerating PO because we're at the first data set, so it'll take a little bit before they get to that state. And then the insulin drip is not paused. So we've answered all these questions, and we're going to verify that by clicking that box there. And then going to our data. So our first data is we don't have a previous one, so we're just going to enter the current one. 7.23 pH. Bicarb was 5. We don't have a previous bicarb, and gap previously was not there. So the current gap is 37.3. And then our sodium uncorrected, meaning whatever's literally listed within our EMR is what we want to put in there. Do not correct it and then put it in here. You'll get the wrong recommendations. So you have 138 was the uncorrected one. And our potassium is 4.9. And our chloride is 99. And our previous glucose, we don't have one, but our current glucose we have at 294. And our patient weighs 90 kilograms, and our diet is NPO, and we don't have any particular fluids on board, and we have insulin drip at 0 units an hour. There's a button down here you might not be able to see called Update Recommendations. I'm clicking that right now. And so currently the patient is in DKA in our current state here, and our insulin recommendations is 13.5 units insulin, and start insulin drip at 9 units an hour. And our fluid recommendations or current fluids, we don't have any fluids on board. Our fluid recommendations is normal saline or 0.9% normal saline at 200 cc an hour with 20 milliequivalents potassium and no additional bicarb recommended. And our current diet is NPO. So our DKA protocol is pretty much loaded into this calculator, and you can just enter the numbers as long as you answer the questions at the top in an appropriate manner. You'll get the right kind of recommendations. We encourage you to both follow the paper protocol and the calculator for the first couple of months while we implement this to see if there's any discrepancies, although we've gone through this several times to make sure there isn't. But this is just a safety measure until we kind of get confident with both with the protocol and the calculator. So here we have data set 2. This is a finger stick. So the rest of the BMP data is exactly the same as the previous one, but our finger stick, our glucose is different. So going through our general guide page again, we are already on the protocol. We're going to evaluate our BMP VBG, and we're still in DKA because the gap and the bicarb and the VBG have not changed. Our chloride hasn't changed, so we're still above 80. And then our sodium and our chloride has not changed again. So this leads us to normal saline insulin combo. And we've already started the insulin drip, so we're just going to go to insulin management or insulin maintenance from here on out. So first going to our insulin maintenance, which this is a new part of the protocol we're introducing here. So our glucose is currently 277. Previously was 294. Again, starting at the yellow boxes on the left side of the protocols, what to do with our glucose? Well, the insulin drip is still on, first of all, at 9 units an hour, and the glucose did not fall more than 100 points because it was previously 294, now it's 277. And then we have a glucose greater than 250, which is currently 277. And so the recommendations is if the glucose is increasing, bolus 5 units and increase the drip by 0.5 units. If the glucose is decreasing, continue the same rate. So it decreased, so we're going to continue the same rate. So again, we have to, every time we adjust our insulin, we have to adjust our fluids. So it's just reminding you there, readjust the fluids and check your BMPs and your finger sticks in appropriate times. So the latest insulin recommendations is to continue the same rate at 9 units an hour. So now we have to go, now that we've adjusted our insulin, we're going to adjust our fluids. So our fluids here, according to the general guide page, led us to normal saline protocol. And so again, normal saline box leads to the question, what kind of glucose do we have? We have greater than 250 because it's 277. So no glucose added again. And is the potassium between 3.5 and 5? Yes, it's 4.9. And potassium is 20 milliequivalents. Is the VBG pH greater than 7? Yes, it's 7.23. So no to sodium bicarb. And our potassium is 20 milliequivalents. Our solution that we're going to select at the end is normal saline potassium 20 milliequivalents at 200 cc an hour. So, and this is mostly the same because the BMP has not changed much. But you might see some of this change given if the glucose is dramatically changing. So again, the latest insulin recommendations is to continue the same rate, and the latest fluid recommendations is to continue normal saline 20 milliequivalents at 200 cc an hour. So this is the latest recommendations again after we went through data set 2, which is just a finger stick of glucose 277. So this is the DKA calculator. We're going to go through set 2 here. Again, we're going to answer all the important questions. Has the patient already been started on sub-Q insulin? No. Has the insulin drip been started? Yes. Is the insulin drip paused? No. Is the patient able to tolerate PO? No. And I'm going to verify that I answered all the questions. And then what is the previous VBG pH is 7.23. The current one is also 7.23. Previous bicarb is 5, and current bicarb is also 5. Anion gap is 37.3. Current one is also 37.3 because our BMP has not changed. Our sodium was 138 uncorrected. So make sure you enter the uncorrected sodium. Do not correct it and enter it here. And our potassium was 4.9. Our chloride is 99. And our previous glucose was 294. And the current one is 277. The patient weighs 90 kgs, and the patient's not having cirrhosis, ESRD, or CHF. And then the diet is going to be still NPO, and the fluids were on normal saline at 20 milliequivalents potassium added to it, and the current drip rate is at 9 units an hour. And I'm clicking update recommendations, and it shows clearly that the patient is still in DKA. And it says if the glucose is increasing, bolus 5 units and increase the drip by 0.5 units. If the glucose is decreasing, continue the same rate. So the glucose is decreasing, so we're going to continue the same rate. So the fluid recommendations is we're currently on normal saline 20 milliequivalents potassium. And the recommendation, since not much of the labs have changed, is still normal saline at 200 cc an hour with 20 milliequivalents potassium added. And the diet is NPO. So we have our data set 3 here. It's another finger stick because it's another hour after. So current glucose is 153. The BMP is exactly the same. The gap is the same. Everything else is the same. So again, we started on a general guide page. MD requested protocol. It's already been started. BMP VBG is going to be evaluated. Our gap is and bicarb and VBG pH is the same, so we're still in DKA. The patient's chloride is greater than 80, and the sodium is less than 145, and chloride is less than 109. So we're still ending up at the normal saline protocol with instructions to continue with the insulin management. So coming to our insulin maintenance management protocol, we have a glucose of 153. So again, starting at the yellow box, insulin drip is still on. The glucose did fall more than 100 points this time, which went from 277 all the way to 153. So we're going to cut the insulin rate by half this time. And again, it's reminding you to adjust the fluids now that you've adjusted the insulin, and to go ahead and draw your BMPs and VBGs and finger sticks on appropriate times. So our latest recommendations is to half the insulin from 9 units an hour to 4.5 units an hour. And now we're going to go to adjusting our fluids like we're instructed to after adjusting our insulin. So here's our data again. And we were instructed by the general guide page to use the normal saline protocol, which we're on right now. So again, normal saline box is the glucose is 153, so it's less than 250 this time. And so we're going to start D5, which is new this time. And the potassium is still 4.9, so we're still going to add 20 milliequivalents potassium. And the VBG pH is 7.23, so it's still greater than 7, so it's no sodium bicarb. The ultimate solution here is going to be D5 normal saline potassium 20 milliequivalents at 200 cc an hour. And so here's our latest recommendations. Half the insulin rate to 4.5 units an hour, and latest fluid recommendations is D5 normal saline potassium 20 milliequivalents at 200 cc an hour. And there's our summary again. Okay, we have our set 3. We're going to enter into the calculator here. Again, answering all the important questions. Has the patient been started on sub-Q insulin? No. Has the DKA insulin drip been started? Yes. Is the insulin drip paused? No. Is the patient able to tolerate PO? No. And I'm verifying I answered all the important questions. And the previous VBG is 7.23. It's also 7.23 right now. Previous bicarb is 5. Current bicarb is 5. And previous anti-gap is 37.3, and current is also 37.3, and sodium uncorrected is 138, potassium is 4.9, and chloride is 99. Our previous glucose was 277, and currently it's 153, and our patient is 90 kgs, and our current patient is NPO, and current fluids is normal saline and with a potassium of 20 milliequivalents added to it. And then our current drip rate is going to be 9 units an hour. So according to this, we're still in DKA, and the insulin recommendations is to decrease the insulin drip rate by half. If your current insulin drip rate is at 9, then set it to 4.5. And then current fluids is half normal saline at 20 milliequivalents potassium. And our recommendations is to go for half it is normal saline. Sorry, I made a mistake. It's normal saline 20 milliequivalents potassium is current fluids. And our fluid recommendations after all of this is normal saline 20 milliequivalents with D5 at 200 cc an hour. And the patient is NPO. So here we have our data set for, it's a BMP and a VBG after 4 hours. We skipped a couple of finger sticks in between. And so we have a glucose of 158 and a previous glucose of 153. And we have a new set of sodium and everything. And so going back to our general guide page, I'm just going to run through it on the PowerPoint here. We have the protocol being started, the BMP VBG being need to be evaluated. Our gap is 21.8, so it's greater than 20. So it puts us in that category of DKA. Just looking at the other numbers, our bicarb is 14. It's less than 16. And our pH is 7.32. So that one is above 7.31, but either one of the gap or the bicarb or the pH have to be abnormal to be considered in DKA. So we're still in DKA. Is the chloride greater than 80? Yes, it is. It is 105. And then our sodium and our chlorides kind of put us into this category of starting the normal saline protocol again. And since the insulin drip has already been started, we're going to start the insulin management protocol or insulin maintenance protocol. So starting with our insulin adjustment, so we have our latest data. We are going to go through the protocol here with the insulin maintenance, starting with the yellow box. Then insulin drip is still on. The glucose did not fall more than 100 points because it went from 153 to 158. And so it's in the 151 to 180 range. So do not change the rate is the recommendation. And again, go adjust your fluids as per the general guide page guidelines. And then also draw your finger sticks and your VBGs and BMPs every 4 hours. So the latest insulin rex is to keep the insulin at the same rate at 4.5 units an hour. And now we're going to adjust our fluids. So we were earlier instructed by the general guide page to go to the normal saline protocol. So we have looking at the normal saline protocol, starting with the normal saline box. Glucose is less than 250, and the patient is already on D5 from our previous adjustments. So this is a new option we haven't selected before. So this time we're going to give the patient D10 just to make sure they're not going to drop their glucose dramatically. And then we're gonna potassium is between 3.5 and 5. It's 4.3, and we're gonna add potassium 20 milliequivalents. And the VBG pH is greater than 7 because it's 7.32. So no sodium bicarb added. And so our ultimate fluids is going to be D10 normal saline potassium 20 milliequivalents at 200 cc an hour. So there's our latest recommendations. Insulin-wise, we're going to keep it at the same rate at 4.5. And latest fluids recommendation is to switch over from D5 to D10 normal saline potassium 20 milliequivalents at 200 cc an hour. And so that's a summary of our recommendations. So here we have our latest set of data. We're going to enter into the calculator set 4's data. So first, starting by answering the important questions: has the insulin drip been started already? Yes. Is the insulin drip on pause? No. Is the patient able to tolerate PO? No. Has the patient been started on insulin sub-Q? No. And then I verified that. Our previous pH was 7.23. Our previous bicarb was 5. And our previous anion gap was 37.3. And then our current pH is 7.32. Our bicarb is 14. And our anion gap is 21.8. Our sodium uncorrected is actually 137. And our potassium is 4.3. And our chloride is 105. And our previous glucose was 153, and our current glucose is 158, and the patient weighs 90 kilograms, and the patient is NPO, the patient's on normal saline, and 20 milliequivalents potassium, and D5 from previous times. And the current insulin drip is 4.5. Now we're going to get the latest recommendations. So the current state, the patient's still in DKA, obviously, and the insulin, we're not going to change the rate. We're going to keep it at 4.5. The current fluids is normal saline, 20 milliequivalents potassium, and D5. And the latest one, we're going to switch over to D10, potassium 20 with normal saline at 200 cc an hour. And the patient's going to be kept NPO. So here's our data set 5. It's a couple of finger sticks later. I didn't want to do every finger stick in between VBG, BMP. Again, we're in our general guide page with our data on the side here. And so we started the MD requested protocol, our BMP VBG is being evaluated. And this time we are hitting some data that says that our anion gap is less than 20 because it's 16.5. And our bicarb is greater than 16, which is 17 right now. And our VBG pH is greater than 7.31, which is 7.37. So, but we've only had this in one BMP so far, not two. So that brings us down to that second box we were talking about much earlier in the presentation. And again, that guides us back to adjusting the fluids and adjusting the insulin because we've only had one BMP saying that we're out of DKA. We need two to really say that we're out of DKA. So We're going to continue with our protocol by adjusting the fluids and adjusting the insulin. So according to that, following the guidelines, we have chloride greater than 80 at 105, and our sodium and our chloride put together combo leads us to normal saline protocol and insulin management protocol again. So going to our insulin management or insulin maintenance, we're going to start with the yellow box, what to do with our finger stick slash VBG BMPs. And so the insulin drip is still on, and the glucose did not fall more than 100 points because it went from 158 to 172. And then the glucose is between 151 and 180 range because it's 172. So again, do not change the rate is the recommendations. And again, it's at the end, it's reminding you to go ahead and draw your BMPs and VBGs every 4 hours and your finger sticks every 1 hour, and to adjust your fluids again. So the recommendations is to keep the same rate of insulin at 4.5 units an hour. So here's our normal saline protocol again, because now that we've adjusted the insulin, we have to adjust our fluids again. And we were recommended earlier from the general guide page to go through the normal saline protocol. So here's our normal saline box. And the patient is on glucose of 172. And the patient is already on D5. The patient is already on D10, and the glucose is less than 250. So we hit that middle box there, and we add D10, or we just continue the D10 that we already have. The potassium is 3.8, so that's between 3.5 and 5. So that adds 20 milliequivalents potassium. And the VBG is showing 7.37, so no sodium bicarb needed. And so that puts us at a fluids of D10 normal saline potassium 20 milliequivalents at 200 cc an hour. So similar fluids as last time. So the latest insulin recommendations is keep the insulin at 4.5 units an hour, and the latest fluid recommendations is D10 normal saline 20 milliequivalents potassium at 200 cc an hour, which is the same thing as previous time. So here's our summary again. Okay, so we're going to enter our set 5 data into the protocol calculator here. So answering all the important questions again. Has the patient been started on sub-Q insulin? No. Has the insulin drip been started? Yes. Has the insulin drip been paused? No. Is the patient able to tolerate PO? No. I've answered all the questions. Coming down, our previous pH was coming from set 4 was 7.32. Our previous bicarb was 14, and our previous anion gap was 21.8. And then our current VBG pH is 7.37. Our bicarb is 17, and our anion gap is 16.5. And our current uncorrected sodium is 132. Our potassium right now is 3.8. Our chloride right now is 105. Our previous glucose is 158. And our current glucose is 172. And current weight is 90 kgs. Diet is still NPO. And the patient is, from previous times, on D10 normal saline and 20 milliequivalents potassium, and the previous insulin drip rate was 4.5. And now with the new data of set 5 entered, I'm going to press for updated recommendations, and it says very clearly the patient's DKA is possibly resolving. Maybe one more set of labs to confirm that the patient's DKA has resolved. That's exactly what our protocol shows us. And no insulin rate changes recommended, so continue the 4.5. And then the current fluids is 20 milliequivalents D10 normal saline, and the recommendation is again the same thing, 20 milliequivalents D10 normal saline at 200 cc an hour, and that's it. So here's our data set 6. It's a couple of finger sticks later again. So here's our data. And again, we're in the general guide page. We started the protocol. We're evaluating our BMP and VBG. And this time, again, our gap is less than 20 because it's 14.9. And our bicarb is greater than 16 because it's 17. And our VBG pH is greater than 7.31. It's 7.38. So this is the second BMP in a row that's really showing that the patient is out of DKA, not in acidosis. So we're down to that bottom green box that starts us to guide us on how to transition the patient out of DKA. So in the next step, we have to decide if the patient is eating or not. This particular patient was not eating or was too somnolent to eat. So I'm going to go with that route. And so that gives us instructions to do a bunch of things actually. Start the patient on sliding scale Q6 hours and discontinue all fluids and insulin drips an hour after administration of the first sliding scale sub-Q. That even it means if you give 0 units of sliding scale, then according to the measurement you did, then you count that as the first time that you gave insulin and stop the drip about an hour later. And then you are also instructed to check BMP and a VBG one more time, 4 hours apart from the last one, to make sure the patient is not going into DKA once you've stopped all the drips and started them on the insulin. And so the insulin latest recommendations are DC the insulin drip, start the sliding scale Q6 hours given patient is NPO, and the latest fluid recommendation is to discontinue all the fluids and draw a BMP and a VBG 4 hours later. So that's the latest recommendations out of the latest data that we have. So now we're going to enter our set 6 data into the DKA calculator. Again, answering all the important questions. Has the insulin drip been started? Yes. Is the patient started on sub-Q insulin yet? No. Is the patient able to tolerate PO? No. Is the insulin drip paused? No. I answered all the important questions. Now going to the previous VBG that we had in set 5. The pH was 7.37. The bicarb was 17, and the anion gap was 16.5. And the current um, data is showing pH of 7.38, bicarb of 17, an anion gap of 14.9, and the sodium uncorrected is 135, and the potassium is 3.9, and the chloride is 107. The previous glucose is 172, and the latest one is 127. And we're going to get update recommendations. So the DKA is resolved at this point, and if the patient cannot tolerate PO intake, then start the patient on Q6 hours sliding scale insulin. Discontinue all fluids and insulin drips an hour after administration of the first sliding scale sub-Q check, and and then we're also going to check a BMP VBG one more time, Q4 hours after the onset of the labs, to make sure the patient is not going back into DKA. So this is because the patient is made NPO at this point. He's not able to tolerate PO intake. Let's say we calculated it and we put that in there and that said that the patient is able to tolerate PO intake. Let's see what the upgrade recommendations are, just to kind of show you. If the patient is tolerating PO, then starting the recommendations is to start the patient on insulin Lantus, and then start the sliding scale ACHS, and then discontinue all insulin drips and fluids an hour after giving the Lantus, and then checking a BMP and a BBG 4 hours away from this one to make sure the patient's not going into DKA, and we can stop checking labs after that. So just to kind of show you the difference between a patient that's eating and resolved DKA and a patient that's not eating and resolved DKA. So here we have set 7. It's a post-transition to sub-Q check of BMP VBG after the 4 hours after the previous one. And so we're going to follow the general guide page again here. We started the protocol. We're evaluating our BMP VBGs. Actually, our previous 2 BMP VBGs before this one showed that we are not having any DKA anymore. But unfortunately, our patient was not eating to transition over to regular usual protocols. And so we're following a modified protocol here, given they're not eating. And we started them on on Q6 hour sliding scale, and then took them off the insulin drip and stopped all the fluids. And then we were instructed to check a BMP-VBG, which is the data we have at hand right now. And looking at that data, our anion gap is 13, which is less than 20. We have a pH of 7.35, which is better than greater than 7.31, and we have a bicarbonate, which is 17, which is greater than 16. So all of that fits into this category up here, indicating that the patient is pretty much transitioned out of DKA well, and even 4 hours after, the labs are showing that the patient is still not going back into DKA, with this seventh set proving that. And eventually, at some point, the patient's going to wake up and be able to tolerate more PO. And when that happens, you can transition them over from 6 hours sliding scales to ACHS sliding scale, and also start them on Lantus. You can call the MD for suggestions on weight-based Lantus if we don't know the dosing that they take at home. And eventually, you want to start feeding the patient once these steps have been taken. And there's our latest recommendations. When the patient tolerates PO, start the Lantus home dose, or call the MD if unknown dose, or first time ever. And also start sub-Q insulin, ACHS, and then you can feed the patient. And the patient's not going to be in DKA anymore at that point. Just a summary again. And now we're going to put that into the calculator and show you the same. So we're going to enter our set 7 data into the calculator, again answering all the important questions. Has the patient already been started on sub-Q insulin? Yes. And then insulin drip is started? No. Insulin drip is paused. It's turned off completely, so we're not going to click that. And is the patient able to tolerate PO intake? Yes. At this point in time, we're going to say that the patient is. And so the pH is 7.35. The bicarb is 17, and the anion gap is 13.10. And so we're going to update recommendations. So the DKA is still resolved even after switching to the sub-Q insulin and drawing another set of labs. And the patient's already been transitioned to sub-Q insulin and no extra fluids needed. And the patient can be started on a diabetic diet down here. Okay, that's it. So the patient is truly not in DKA anymore, and we're now going to go to questions and try to answer any doubts you guys have. That's it. Thank you.